Welcome to your shakeup. I am so excited about this episode because you know that this podcast is all about helping you show up unapologetically to build the life and business of your dreams, even if you're scared shitless. Well, let's talk about being scared shitless for a second. Usually when we are scared shitless is because our brain is only focused on the worst case scenario. So if we have a big goal or we have an aspiration, we don't go after it because we are scared of the worst case scenario that it might not work out. Rather than putting so much light and giving so much power to the best case scenario of it actually working out. And there's a stat out there. I will get it and put it in the show note, but there's a stat that says, I'm going to make up the stat for a second, but like 90% of the time, the worst case scenario does not happen. 90%. Do you like how I'm really emphasizing this 90%, even though that stat has no actual data behind it? I just pulled it out of my ass, but it's because it's true. But I'm so serious when I say that most of the time our worst case scenario doesn't happen. And so because we don't allow ourselves to really acknowledge that the best case scenario is so amazing, we give too much power to the worst case scenario. So this episode is going to be all about really helping us identify best case and worst case scenario and creating a game plan. So in my course, and really all of the services that we have for Empowered Confidence, a lot of the things that I work on with my clients is bringing this brand or business to life. And a lot of the times, 99.999% of the time, that is an accurate stat, actually. A lot of the times my client is so terrified by the worst case scenario. And so we do this activity called Hello Fear. Hello Fear. And it takes us through this process of identifying what your goal is, getting really clear on what the fear is, and creating a worst case to best case scenario, and then a plan for the worst case scenario. So this is what we're going to do today. And this is what I want you to do after this episode, and send it to me. Like, send it to me, girl. I want to help you through this, and I want us to do this. So I do this with everything. Every time I have a goal, okay, and I am crippled by it. So let's say that I want to pitch myself to Create and Cultivate to speak at their event. I am terrified to do that, right? And I have two options. I'm either terrified to do it and I don't do it, or I'm terrified to do it and I do it. So let's say I have a goal of speaking at Create and Cultivate. Now, the worst case scenario would be that I pitch myself and the whole Create and Cultivate team like sees my pitch and cackles at me and is like, this girl at Create and Cultivate, like, who does she think she is, right? Because I'm a psycho, and like that is what I think is going to happen when I pitch myself. Do you feel like that? Like, you think that you are going to do something and the world is going to laugh at you? Like, we just give ourselves way too much credit. Nobody is like really obsessed with us as much as we think they are. But let's say my worst case scenario is that everybody reads it and they're like, no way is she going to speak at this? She's not credible enough. This topic does not make sense, like whatever it is. But the best case scenario that they're like, hey, Marina, we got your email and we would absolutely love for you to come speak at Create and Cultivate. That is the worst case, best case scenario. So what I'm going to do, rather than leaving it at that, rather than just acknowledging the best case and the worst case scenario, what I'm going to do is actually create a plan for the worst case scenario. So let's say the worst case scenario is actually that they are going to reject me. What am I going to do after? So my plan is, if they reject me, is to, one, read their email and understand why they're rejecting me, right? So they're going to say, we don't have time right now. Maybe this topic isn't good, or that's not our focus, or even if they were like, we would like speakers to have X years of experience, whatever it is, I'm going to then create a plan. And that plan could be, I'm going to create more content that shows that I'm an expert. Maybe I already have that content and I could curate a better media kit that highlights that. If worst case scenario happens, I'm going to continue to attend the conferences and keep introducing myself to more people there and actually network and position myself as the expert in that field. And I'm going to make sure that I am so intentional with how I reach out, how I show up, what I talk about. So I can then show up as that expert. So I can then have that authority presence when it comes to who I am in the industry. So when I take my goal of speaking at the conference, I take the worst case scenario of getting rejected, the best case scenario, we didn't even highlight that just yet, but then I create a plan for the worst case scenario. The worst case scenario doesn't really seem that bad anymore because I'm like, oh, okay, well, if they reject me, I'm just going to work on X, Y, and Z. Maybe I'm going to even create a bigger list. So I'm pitching myself out to more people with adding more of my expertise in my media kit, right? I'm taking away the power of the worst case scenario. Now let's talk about the best case scenario. The best case scenario that they are like, yes, we would love for you to speak at Create and Cultivate. And we would love for you to talk about personal branding. When I tell you that alone, that best case scenario makes me so freaking happy that I don't care about that worst case scenario, because in my head, that best case scenario is so freaking good. Do you see what I did there? I took the power away from the worst case scenario and I gave all of the power to the best case scenario because I have a plan if they reject me. And so that is how I want you to handle all situations. When we are crippled by fear, when we are scared shitless, we tend to only focus on the worst case scenario. The reason why we are crippled, the reason why we're scared is because we think the worst case scenario is so terrible. But if we create a plan and we are prepared for the worst case scenario and we give all of the power to the best case scenario, it won't hold us back. If we can tell ourselves, I know what I'm going to do if the worst case scenario happens, worst case scenario isn't that bad. Now, let me tell you, for Create and Cultivate, what I actually did was I was scared shitless, like truly scared shitless. And I messaged them when I saw that there was a small business summit that they were having. And I was like, hey, this was literally my email. Hey, I would love to speak at the small business summit. I saw that it's happening at this time. I would love to be a speaker there. No response for 1 week, no response for 2 weeks. So I had already had a plan. If they don't respond to me, what I'm going to do is then go back on their website and take all of the appropriate sessions that they have that would make sense for me to lead or to speak on, and put together a little blurb on why I would be a good speaker for those sessions. I'm doing the work for them essentially in terms of letting them know this is where you can place me. So what I did is I went on the website and there were 3 sessions. One was like 2 were panels. And one was a mentor session, or one was a panel, one was a workshop, one was a mentor session. And I was like, here is how I can provide value to your community. These are the things that I could talk about. Here is why. And here is what I would love to highlight. Let me know if this helps, and let me know if I could provide anything else to help the decision-making process. And within a few days, I got a message back being like, hey, Marino, a team member will reach out to you. And I was like, oh my God. And then I realized that I actually was more scared of the best case scenario than the worst case scenario, but that's going to be a whole nother episode. Like we are so scared of success and the best case scenario that we actually trick ourselves thinking we're just scared of the worst case scenario. So for your challenge for this shakeup, I challenge you to start writing down your goals and the things that are holding you back. Thinking about the fear, create a best case scenario, a worst case scenario, and a plan for the worst case scenario so you can be fully equipped and completely confident that it doesn't matter if the worst case scenario happens because you're ready for it. And my stat that is not backed up by any data, 90% of the time, worst case scenario doesn't happen. You got this, girl. Do not let fear win. Even if we're scared shitless, we're going to do it anyway. Love you. Bye.